Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Retro Chat. This is being recorded on twitch.tv/RetroMMO, recorded live as always. And today I am joined by Heleor and his cat. Heleor is the developer, the creator of the game Genfanad, which is, I guess to put it as short as possible, is a spiritual successor to RuneScape Classic. But if you want to just to start out, go ahead and let us know, who are you, Heleor, and how would you describe your game?
So, hello, my name's Andre. Heleor is what I go by online. I'm a software engineer who's been working in the non-games industry for a long time and basically got a bit burnt out and wanted to do my own creative project. So when we started, basically what we were thinking of is I was just doing some small games while working at another company. And I discovered a nice guide on how to make HTML5 games with multiplayer. The last time I touched game development was about a decade ago, and multiplayer game development was significantly more difficult back then. So I was like, hey, this is easy. I made a little small game where you run around and you shoot people with hooks based on Pudge Wars, and I was like, this is easy. Let's try something more difficult. So I was like, RuneScape Classic was developed by 3 people in a garage 20 years ago. So surely with all of the new discoveries, all of the new language features, all of the new technology that is available today, I could do it myself. And here we are 3 years later, and spoiler, I could not do it myself.
Maybe, well, yeah, maybe not in a timely manner by yourself, at least, but it is pretty cool how browser technology has advanced to the point where some indie developer can throw together an MMO, even if it does take a couple thousand hours to even get, like, I mean, I don't know how many man hours you've actually put in, but you've put a lot of time into Genfanad, and there's still so far to go. And of course I know as well, with my MMO project, I've put in thousands of hours, and that's equated to like 3 hours of game content so far. So, and you've been a big RuneScape fan for a long time, right? Like, it's no coincidence that
I definitely have a lot of stories of playing it as a kid, of sneaking out of my lunchroom, going to the library and playing a few minutes of that. That's showing my age a bit. Most people these days just have tablets and phones that they can play on whenever they want. So definitely coming from a bit of an old generation type feel of, this is what the games used to be like 20 years ago, and we want to recreate and build on top of that feeling.
Yeah. Were you always a much larger fan of the way that things were done in RuneScape Classic versus the later versions? Because I guess another bit of context here for people that are not as familiar with RuneScape, the game has significantly changed over time. It's kind of had 2 massive reworks where the combat system changed entirely, and Genfanad is very, very true to the original version of the game from the very early 2000s. But yeah, you always preferred that sort of style, or no?
I wouldn't necessarily call myself a too deep of a fan. I have a lot of good memories from the classic era of RuneScape. I have a lot of good memories from the RuneScape 2 rework, and which is what Jagex is trying to recreate with old school RuneScape now.
Yeah.
But the feeling that I was trying to recreate is basically is rooted completely from nostalgia and not even rooted too much from the game itself. What I'm really looking for is I'm looking for the experience where, as a kid, I would get all of these bursts of excitement every week when there was a new update release, when there was little text popping up that says, hey, something new is going to happen and you're going to get a brand new experience. And that would happen in small bite-sized chunks over a long period of time, multiple times a month, multiple new things to do every week.
Yeah, man, I know that feeling. Same here growing up playing RuneScape. I didn't play RuneScape 1 as a kid. It was about 2007, 2008 by the time that I started playing. But that's,
Yeah.
yeah, just like seeing that, like the games like RuneScape did it. They'd have like weekly updates or very frequent updates. There were other browser games I played that did similar things, like Adventure Quest, and I remember was another one that I would get so excited to check back once a week. But that's really not even that common of a thing so much anymore for MMOs. It's more like World of Warcraft, for example, or a lot of the larger, like more traditional MMOs in modern times. It's like they put everything into some like one large, huge, massive expansion versus the RuneScape strategy of just like here's a little thing every week. And I kind of like it more that way. The like
A
the
lot
piece
of
by
games
piece.
have actually moved to that type of release schedule where they do quarterly or yearly releases, which get a lot of publicity, get a lot of hype going. You
Yeah.
can't really get a lot of marketing excitement about something that is tiny. Like World of Warcraft releases a new pet, is probably never going to make marketing headlines.
Mm.
Uh, that said, the player experience of the small bite-sized updates that keep you coming back week over week is something that I am very interested in recreating, and that's one of the things because of that marketing mismatch. That's something that big AAA studios are never going to necessarily pursue. That's not something that they consider valuable. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one opportunity for us as an indie studio to get something that is closer to what players want, that are not being filled today. Even RuneScape, when they started out, frequently you would get a weekly update that says, "Hey, we released 4 new quests back in 2001,
Yeah.
2002 era RuneScape." Uh, if you RuneScape has been out for 20 years, there are 52 weeks in a year. There are not 1,000 quests in RuneScape.
Yeah.
In fact, they have, I believe, fewer than 200. So they have definitely significantly slowed down their update release rates.
Yup.
Uh, and even both in RuneScape 3 and in old school RuneScape, they're not really pursuing that update rate anymore. And as a game developer, I completely understand. Once you have a large body of content, releasing a new piece of content that is both unique, interesting, and doesn't break anything that is already out there becomes more difficult over time. And I completely understand that we're going to run into that issue eventually as well, where we have so much content that releasing new, interesting content is more difficult. I'm looking forward to solving that problem.
Yeah. Well, I really don't think it's one of those things where, well, maybe I'm wrong. I guess players can be pretty needy and demanding, but I think what people are, or what I appreciate at least, is like not necessarily the amount of things that are being put out, but the strategy that is given towards the release schedule. Like if a game is of the mindset of let's just put out little pieces of content when we have them versus batch things all together in a massive chunk, whether you're releasing 4 quests a week or like 1 quest a month, I'm not personally gonna, bring my pitchfork out. Maybe people will though. Maybe people will be like, dang, there's just not enough new things. But with a game like RuneScape, it's so grindy that it's really hard to imagine. Like, it blows my mind, especially with like old school RuneScape, just like how much people really want new stuff and just feel bored when it's like how how the hell are you even able to keep up with anything? Like I could spend my entire life and complete only a tiny fraction of all the things there are to do in OSRS probably, or RuneScape 3
You
even
have to
even more
think of
so.
the different uh, types of content out there. So,
Yeah.
for example, the core game loop, both in RuneScape and in Genfanad, is you are a character, you have these stats, and you perform actions by clicking on things to get minimal amounts of experience that increase your stats and let you go up and become more skilled. Someone can have a 5-minute gameplay session where all they do is click on 100 trees, chop them down and get some logs and then drop them. And they still feel a sense of progression because their character has gotten at least incrementally better just from cutting those trees. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, there's a lot of casual, relaxing games in the market out there today, which is why I think that a revival of a classic RuneScape Classic like mechanics might be successful for players today. Is there's a lot of games where people just like doing relaxing, uh, repetitive tasks on a regular basis. You don't have to go in and you don't have to grind for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't have to be progressed to schedule a 4-hour raid that you want to join, you could just log in for 5 minutes, make some progress, and then do it again the next day and the next day. But with that core game loop, that's basically the ice cream sundae of the game, where most of the content that we create, most of the content that players will interact with, is that type of relaxing, grinding type mechanics. However, a lot of what players come back to week after week is the sprinkles on top, is the novelty of releases, is the new quest, the new handcrafted experience for a player to do, a brand new area to explore. All of those are reasons to perform the relaxing, the grinding content.
Yeah,
And
everybody wants to have goals that they're working towards. Yeah,
exactly.
They want to be skilling to
do stuff. Players will tune out.
Right. Yeah. Typically, even the people that are, you got to be a little bit crazy to just be skilling just to skill. You got to be a little bit crazy to just be going for 200 million experience, just to be going for 200 million experience.
I think there are a lot of people who enjoy, not to say grinding necessarily, but they enjoy the relaxing, the repetitive nature.
Right.
In fact, when I was developing Genfanad, this was like 3 years ago, I had a really rough prototype up and running. The rough prototype had the character moving around, it had an inventory, it had some trees, but it had no reason to actually do anything. There was no high scores, it was just a development server on my own computer. No one else was playing it with me. And yet I still found myself just mindlessly clicking on trees, watching them get chopped down.
Yeah.
And just hearing the sound effects and looking at the XP number slightly going up each time. And I knew that it's not for everyone, but the people who it is for will really, really enjoy what we're building.
Yeah, I mean, it's really crazy that RuneScape had that sort of like reward system figured out so early, you know, like 20 years ago. Because just in like even just like in the past 5-10 years, like idle games, incremental game, like a cookie clicker, and now we have like all these. There's so many mobile idle games now. Like I feel like every major like television franchise or something ends up getting some like crappy idle mobile game port. And like meanwhile RuneScape has been doing practically that. I mean, there's also other example like like Dragon Quest, I guess, like even farther back in the 80s or whatever. It's kind of the same thing, but RuneScape kind of takes it even further.
Put it closer to, so there's a stem of relaxing casual games, Animal Crossing, but there's definitely a pedigree of relaxing casual, cute and cozy titles that we think would make a very good mix with the MMO approach. So Farmville back in 2006, 2010 was incredibly popular with people who don't consider themselves gamers. Mm-hmm. They just logged into Facebook, they had a farm, they did some actions day over day, and it triggered the dopamine hit. It was definitely something that they enjoyed doing, and they enjoyed the social interaction of doing it, as much or as little of social interaction that Facebook actually gives. The fact that you could do it with your friends, the fact that you could compete or cooperate was a very good improvement for people.
True, yeah. Farmville is actually just RuneScape. I didn't even think about that. Actually the same. Man, Animal Crossing is actually an interesting comparison. I never really thought about it that way. I guess just because, you know, Animal Crossing doesn't have skills, but, you know, it has the grindy, repetitive skilling just without the experience. It has the, you know, collectathon. Actually is kind of appealing in the
that's actually
same
one
sort
of
of way.
Appealing to more casual players, appealing to players who wouldn't otherwise touch MMOs because for better or for worse, MMOs have a bit of a reputation even amongst gamers, but especially amongst non-gamers of well, the South Park episode covered it pretty
yeah.
And that reputation isn't necessarily unearned. There's a lot of mechanics in MMOs that are specifically devoted to extracting as much time from the players as possible. In fact, more than they're willing to give in a lot of cases. Our model, the RuneScape model, has some of that, but we're basically trying to soften and polish off a lot of the rough edges that MMOs otherwise have. we're not in we're not necessarily interested in building like late game raid content. We're definitely not interested in forcing every player to reach the max level. In fact, a lot of the new RuneScape players have a concept of XP waste. I reject that concept. I really don't think that any players that follow that would make a successful game. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't believe that players should reach the max level ever. Some players are going to be insane and do it anyway, but I think most players who enjoy it casually, who interact with it week over week, play it a few hours a week at most, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Uh, they should be able to be happy with the progress that they're making and not compare themselves against other players or compare themselves against high scores or things like that.
Yeah, I really, it really is a shame what's happened to like the overall mindset of RuneScape players, because like we all have those good memories of being kids and just having like silly interactions with people just walking around and being social just for the sake of doing it, and like that is I guess there's still some of that, but there's also just like that horrible, overwhelming, like crazy, like always got to be efficient mindset. And it's like, yeah, naturally you're going to want to be going to want to be efficient in a game about numbers, but there reaches a point where it just doesn't feel fun. And it was a good time playing some Genfanad yesterday actually, and just like seeing that anytime you run into another player, they're just like so happy to see a new guy and just like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, trying to
I
chat
saw
to
the
you about
interaction
stuff.
you had yesterday where you were killing slimes and a bunch of people in high level metal armor reached out to you and were like, would you like to join our clan?
They said we're in a ranged focused clan. Would you like to join it? I was like, this game has clans? They're like, we started a Discord server. I love that, man. I love that you don't even have clans and people are making Discord servers to make their unofficial clans. So yeah, that took me right back to like mid 2000s playing RuneScape. Like honestly, like deja vu.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty fun.
One of the biggest benefits is we are not, uh, because we are not Jagex, because we don't have the IP, we don't have all of the cruft of all of the existing updates. Even old school RuneScape launched with like years worth of content if you want to go through everything. We're starting from scratch. We're building up a new game, and we're going to be expanding it week over week with incremental updates that expand the world. Players who join us today are going to be growing up, uh, seeing the game grow around them, and learning the new things as they go along. There's not much content there today, but there will be more and more content built up. And because we don't have all of this legacy things that we have to account for, we can build things differently. We can build things in our own way.
Yeah, you can make 4 quests a week. Yeah.
We can make 4 quests a week, but we can also rewrite how blacksmithing works and completely
Right.
change the way that you create armor by making every single item in the game have low, medium, and high qualities, and have different recipes where you actually have to discover and figure out how do you make this bronze longsword.
Yeah, I think that's a huge advantage that you guys have. Like when you look at RuneScape, who they had no one, they weren't really copying anyone super closely. Maybe there was like some Ultima inspiration and things, but they were kind of just figuring it out as they go, versus you, who has all this time spent like researching and studying RuneScape and a clean slate to work off of.
Well, RuneScape was not as groundbreaking as you'd like to think. There was definitely Ultima and EverQuest that came before that, but RuneScape is basically a thin graphical shell around a class of MUDs, multi-user dungeons that existed for decades before RuneScape came around. So MUDs actually track down their history, and this is wearing my historian hat a bit. MUDs actually go back to old mainframe computers where people in universities would actually be able to have uh, timeshares allocated to being able to use this crazy new technology called a computer. and they would sit on a terminal, which was basically just a dumb connection to the mainframe, and they would play all sorts of different types of games. Uh, mods were basically one of the earliest type of multiplayer game where you would connect to a server and it would be completely text-based interaction where you would join a multiplayer adventure game and you would go and kill a goblin and get experience. Uh, in fact, Andrew Gower was creating a mod of his own called Devious Mud before RuneScape came along. And then he was also playing around with early Java 3D technology. He made a bouncing purple color game in Java and something like that. And then he had the idea to basically combine the two concepts and what would it be like if the mod actually had graphics and what would it be like if he connected the 3D experience to the 2D gameplay that the mods had. And that's how RuneScape was basically born originally.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair point, that they really were pulling pretty much everything from somewhere else, I guess, except for maybe the graphical presentation was revolutionary. But I guess what my point is that RuneScape maybe being the very first widely popular graphical mud versus you wouldn't even say that.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say
well,
that.
Would you call Ultima Online a graphical mud?
Pretty much. A lot of the games had two inspirations. They were either based on Dungeons and Dragons or they were based on the old.
Well, where do you draw the line? When do we become modern MMO versus multi-user dungeon?
Man, you're putting me on the spot right now, aren't you? There's a lot of history of MMOs. I believe Ultima Online was probably one of the first. I believe it came out in 1999. The earliest things that would be considered MMOs by modern standards were in the late 90s, not the early 2000s. RuneScape's claim to fame was basically that it was a browser-based game. You didn't have to install anything. You could play it from. You can basically play it on any computer that had an internet connection, and that's basically where it took the internet by storm. Is because MMOs were not accessible to everyone back then, but here was this job application that you can just go to a website and start playing immediately. And that was the big claim to fame. And then there were a lot of partnerships that early RuneScape did. Miniclip, I believe, was one of the earliest partnerships that they had. Oh,
really? I didn't know that.
Could actually go to a website that usually has like all of these really silly Flash games, which were an awesome relic of the early internet. But then you could also click a button, and then instead of playing an early Flash game, like where you have to click to explode something, and then that's the extent of the game, you would actually get a fully fledged game where you have this character and you walk around and you collect these items and you kill these monsters. It was definitely a very large shift, and that's how it attracted a lot of the very early fans of the genre. Now, back then there was a lot of elitism, and there still is a lot of elitism, so most real MMO players would not consider RuneScape a real MMO. Because, you play it in the browser and it has these crappy graphics. Ours are more realistic, and there's all these browns and greens and things like that. You might be familiar with that because those types of conversations have not changed.
Yeah, no.
These days it's Fortnite versus Roblox versus Minecraft or whatever the kids are calling it these days. But those types of conversations have not gone anywhere.
I doubt that World of Warcraft players have stopped shitting on RuneScape players either. I mean, maybe. I mean, nope. even into like RuneScape 2 and like the late. It took a while for. Like it wasn't really until like Evolution of Combat until RuneScape started looking like, I guess, what people consider to be a proper MMO.
No, it still isn't. The entire concept of talking about proper MMOs and proper graphics and all that is silly. You're all playing games built for kids.
Right.
You're not convincing anyone, and you're just giving yourselves a bad reputation.
Yeah. Well, you were saying earlier, you were talking a lot about how Genfanad is very much appealing to like the casual, relaxed gameplay. But I know that you're also probably going to get a lot of RuneScape Classic fans that are very hardcore on either like the in-game PvE or the PvP, and they're those people that just really love the. A lot of people were just really upset about RuneScape 2's combat. They just really enjoyed the the 3 rounds before you were able to run. They really enjoyed hits all hitting at the same time. Are you going to, I guess, are you concerned that maybe some of those people will not be satisfied if you're not trying to appeal to them so much as just the casual players?
The premise that we're going for is definitely the case where we want to bring an experience that is familiar to players who have the nostalgia goggles on, but does use modern mechanics, and we are not afraid to change things that we know worked for that we know did not work in the original. We're not tied to creating a experience that is exactly matched to what was limited by the technology of 2001.
Right.
In RuneScape Classic were absolutely not design features and were in fact just limitations of what they could do. Things like only one person being able to talk to a banker at once.
Yeah.
And things like the smithing menu, clicking an anvil, and then you click the category, and then you click the subcategory, and then you click the subcategory, and then you get a confirmation screen. In fact, just to create a bronze dagger out of a single bar, it would require like 6 or 7 clicks in RuneScape.
Yeah. Oh, it was ridiculous. Yeah. Like the skilling.
We're not tying ourselves to that. In fact, as you played the game yesterday, you've probably seen a lot of the new interfaces and the new basically the new quality of life features that we're bringing to it.
Yeah, and I think that's how it should be. I quality of life as far as like skilling, like I don't know, you had to like, didn't you have to drop the logs on the ground even in RuneScape Classic and then use your tinderbox on the logs on the ground? Like that is just.
They added the quality of life feature to be able to do it in the inventory about a year or two into the life cycle of the game. But in terms of the question you originally asked, which was about the players coming from it with a very strict nostalgia goggles, people looking for a PvP experience, people looking for a very true to life experience, we're considering some things sacred, as in things that we are absolutely not changing, despite the new target audience that we're trying to appeal to. Some of the things that we're considering sacred are the art style, which is definitely a controversial decision. The cartoon, brightly colored visuals, the 3D world with low poly models, and the animated, the hand-drawn character and monster art. We consider that to be the art direction that we want to follow with our game. So we want to build the game around that and try to appeal to people despite it looking like that.
Yeah.
Things like the 3-round combat mechanic and the fact that players get locked into combat and have the weird, almost Final Fantasy style where two people are side by side and they're just alternating swinging.
Yeah, weapons. I mean, it's essentially turn-based.
We absolutely want to keep that around. And there was a third thing that I'm not recalling right now. The art style, the combat mechanics, and it was also in the art style category. It's the fact that we don't have animated characters, but that we have little bubbles over
yeah.
that they're performing. We're well aware that looks really wonky by modern game standards, but that's kind of like the appeal of these retro style games. Even in there's a lot of recent casual games where players would just have these little thought bubbles pop up over their heads when they're thinking of it. And in fact, in RetroMMO, I think that's how you did the emote system.
Yeah.
Pop-ups over people's heads. I just think that's a really cute artistic touch.
Yeah, I love that. I got that idea from Ragnarok Online, actually. They did they have cute emotes in that game. So will there be, I guess, will there be a lot of like repeatable end game PvE content? Will there be PvP things like the wilderness or like scenarios like will there be a reason to do high level combat that will actually be like engaging for a hardcore player?
Uh, at some point, of course.
Yeah.
One of the things with trying to build a system such that you can develop new content on a regular basis and get weekly interesting content updates going is that that is a very hungry beast. It'll consume a lot of design space, and we will want to create new stuff that is interesting. And we will run into the point where, yes, players have gotten on an average a high level enough that we should add some uh, things, some monsters to meet the level and to have even the high level players grind towards.
Mm.
That said, I don't think that bossing or raiding is something that is devoted to high levels only. One of the
Right.
things that we are changing about RuneScape Classic is RuneScape Classic didn't really have any boss type monsters. They had the King Black Dragon that they released
Yeah.
almost near the end of development, but that was just a bigger, badder version of their normal dragon. They
Mm.
also had a couple of puzzle bosses, if I remember correctly, both in terms of bosses as quests, but also I think Solarian the Twisted was a dungeon boss that you can only damage using Mind Rune spells or something like that.
Mm.
Uh, I definitely think that that makes good gameplay content that players of different levels would enjoy. The alpha that is currently running that people can try out for Genfanad has one dungeon in an example, and it has one boss, which has a unique mechanic of enraging,
Yeah.
where the boss is basically a paired boss, and you have two monsters, and when you kill one, the second one becomes twice as powerful and attacks you immediately. I think the concept of there being lots of unique bosses with different twists, with different quirks that players have to figure out how to work around, is something that makes compelling gameplay. And we are definitely interested in making a lot of different boss types and a lot of different gameplay types for all sorts of levels.
Yeah.
There doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily have to be a case where we make a level 150 boss monster and only the highest level players can do it. We can make a boss monster that's targeted at level 30 players. We can
Yeah.
make a boss monster that's targeted at level 20 players.
I like that a lot. Yeah. I think missed opportunity. The fact that RuneScape wasn't doing that earlier on, for sure. I mean, in old school RuneScape, you see them sort of going back and filling up the earlier mid game content a bit now. And on old school RuneScape, we have things like or like Obor, a free to play boss, even the Hill Giant boss, and you see that a lot in like, I mean, most MMOs have learned that by now. Like World of Warcraft, the end game PvE content is like doing dungeons or doing raids, but that's not an end game specific thing, right? They have content like that for
Well,
like
World of Warcraft is actually one of the examples that we're trying to avoid very hard because they were one of the first to pioneer the concept of, well, let's put all of our content at the highest levels, and then whenever we release an expansion, let's push all of our players to reach that highest level as soon as possible. So
right.
when they released the level 70 tier skills or this level 70 tier expansion, players who are just joining in World of Warcraft are expected to grind up to level 70 as quickly as possible. And until they do, they're not really invited to any of the parties, to any of the late game content.
Yeah.
We really want to avoid that. We want to make as many opportunities for players of lower level and players of higher level to meet and interact in game. Because ultimately, single player RuneScape would not be very fun to play.
Yeah. True.
A lot of the appeal is the emergent game content and the social interactions that you get with other people playing the game.
Do you worry that over time, as the game becomes more popular, that players will, the overall mindset of the community will shift more towards that like very efficiency heavy, grind heavy thing that RuneScape has going on? That's something that I've always thought of as just kind of inevitable for MMOs.
The way that I think about it, and as a game designer, this is a lesson that many people should definitely learn, is solve the problems that are in front of you. Don't spend time worrying about problems that may not ever becoming relevant. So, for example, a lot of people ask, uh, "Are you worried that if you have 50,000 players, you'll have to rewrite your server code to scale across multiple game servers and shard it?" My response to that is, well, if I have 50,000 players, I will be a very happy person to start solving those problems at that time.
Right.
Very similarly, I think that cultivating a community that is not interested in competition and grinding and XP waste and things like that is something that happens over time. And there are ways in game design to encourage and discourage certain things. Things like having a global high score table is something that encourages people to compete against each other uh, and to basically get as much efficiency out of their time as possible.
Mm-hmm.
We're not even sure we're going to end up having a global high score table when we release. We might have a more casual type situation where the game design says, you are in the top 500 woodcutters, you are in the top 500 miners, and basically have some sort of categorized progression where you don't get the raw numbers that you would expect. Similarly, in the UX, right now we have raw numbers which say you have 537,000 experience and you need 543,000 to reach the next level, which means you need to cut exactly 1,500 wooden trees in order to reach that next level. That type of experience kind of promotes and encourages people to take on that XP waste mindset. Whereas if we instead rethink the stats and present it as a progress bar, and don't necessarily hide the numbers away, but make it so that it's more work, more effort to see the raw numbers, and instead you just see the progress bar going up over time. That's a game design principle that can discourage that type of attitude. I think if you know what problems you are trying to prevent, and you have enough time, enough runway in the future to try to steer or nudge your player base away from that, those problems should be solvable. That said, if we are highly successful and 3 years later, most of our community has turned into that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing for the game overall, because it means, hey, our game is alive 3 years from now and it has players. It's already a good thing from our perspective.
True. Yeah, that is all very interesting. I can definitely say about the leaderboards in specific, man, those RuneScape fans will chew you up if you don't give them their leaderboards. But
that is true, but it's not because they want a leaderboard specifically. It's because they want the prestige of being in a certain position. And you can give them that prestige with other game design concepts. Like, for example, if on their stats page they said, you are in the top 10 of miners, would they need an actual mining high score to know that they are exactly 5,321 experience away from being ranked 9 or something like that?
Right.
Maybe not.
Well, yeah, that's cool that you're willing to pursue other ways of doing it rather than just like, you know, shutting it down. Just, we have to copy because I think that's anybody who's making like a sort of spiritual successor of a game, or who's making to look something that's very, very directly inspired by another game. I think that if you are not willing to challenge every single thing that game did, if you're just blindly copying everything, it's definitely not going to result in something that is good and stands on its own. And it's very clear that you are willing to challenge things, even the things that some people.
Something that the original IP owner wouldn't necessarily be able to do.
Yeah, they could never remove the leaderboard. Impossible. Yeah,
exactly.
Actually impossible. Well, I guess shifting gears a bit. as far as the tech stack or just like technological aspects in general, you chose browser tech. Was that more of something just because you had more experience with it, or was that because, I mean, obviously, like you were saying earlier, RuneScape got its fame from being a browser game. Was that play
Uh,
into it?
in terms of experience, absolutely not. I am not and have never been a front end developer. I have always
Okay.
been deep in the bowels of back end code. Realistically, as a software engineer, once you get high enough level, the specific details of the stack that you're working on uh, tend to matter less. Anyone with enough time spent in a specific environment will become competent at that environment really quickly. Uh, in fact, in software engineering, there's always a large discussion about whether you're becoming a uh, depth or breadth type software engineer. So the breadth type and software engineers are basically involved in touching many different systems. They know how to Google, they know how to figure out exactly how to maximize whatever software situations they're doing. The depth type engineers are the ones that basically when you think of a very senior, very old, wise software engineer, they're the ones that you think of. They're the bearded person hanging out in a cave that know exactly how many microseconds a specific instruction on a specific processor architecture type things. I was never one of the depth type engineers. I had touched many different systems and have looked at many different types of designs, but front end code was never really my strength. So the browser based technologies are kind of more of it's more of a personal thing. I think browsers have one very strong competitive advantage to every other technology out there, and that's accessibility. Not in terms of uh, not just in terms of disability-based accessibility. So things like uh, screen readers, things like assisted input methods, things like that. But in terms of getting someone in front of your game as quickly as possible.
Right.
If you're building a Unity game, for example, you can make a downloadable zip. But in order to get someone playing your game, you have to figure out how to give them the zip. You have to figure out which distribution they want, whether they're on Mac, whether they're on Windows, whether they're on Linux. You have to give them the right zip file. They have to unzip it. They have to download it. They have to unzip it. They have to install it. They have to make sure that it's compatible with their system. Every single one of those steps is friction that different players would have issues with. And many people would not necessarily follow the steps unless they're already interested in the game. Whereas with web technologies, what you do is you give them a link, they click a button, and within a few seconds, they're already playing your game. That onboarding experience cannot be beaten by any other technology. It can be mitigated, but it cannot be beaten.
Agreed. Yeah. No, I mean, RetroMMO would have like 5 users right now if it wasn't in the browser for sure. And you do you roll JavaScript on the back end as well for your?
We do. That's not necessarily the best decision, but it is just a decision that we followed. We use there's actually not very much shared code between the front end and the back end. The front end, in fact, the front end is in 3D, and the back end doesn't even have any 3D components whatsoever.
Gotcha.
Very similarly to RuneScape, the actual gameplay is mud based. It's a 2D grid of positions.
Yeah,
and
it's tile grid. Yeah.
that 2D grid. All of the 3D-ness, all of the camera management, all of the model loading, all of the rendering, that's all completely client side, and the server doesn't care at all about it.
Yeah. And you did roll like an entire custom engine, right? I mean, obviously you're using Three.js for the rendering, but you don't use a game framework or a game engine. Like the architecture of your code is all like in-house, right?
I think a lot of people have too much of a fascination with I rolled my own engine or I built my own engine, and too few people actually complete projects and actually build games. People can, and I'm not even necessarily digging at you very much, Evan, but too many people focus on engines and technologies
I
rather
got
than
3 games released. I don't know what you're talking about.
in terms of I would not call what we wrote an engine. We built
Yeah.
our game, we built the software and the technologies that are needed to support the game, and we built them in a way that we can expand them over time, both
Yeah.
in terms of separation of content and code. So for example, in order to create a new monster in the game, you don't actually write any code. What you do is you go create a JSON file that describes the monster and run our script to run our basically makefile scripts that generate all of the client and server settings that are downloaded. But you don't actually have to write any new code to create a new monster. That lets our game designers and our content creators actually create content without necessarily being bottlenecked to one programmer, which is me, or one of the other programmers who are on the project, like Cameron. That lets us actually start working very independently. And similarly, the map design and the shop design and the skill design, all of those, they're just implemented using backend files that are edited, that are stored in Git, that various team members modify on a regular basis.
What does the Genfanad dev team look like, by the way? How large are you?
So we've definitely grown a bit more than I would have expected from the beginning of the project. As many of the Kickstarter questions coming in are saying, you can't really build an MMO for $10,000. You can't really build an MMO with just one person contributing and doing all of the work. You can, but it's never going to get released, pretty much.
Yeah.
So we actually have a team of freelancers working on the project. They're all paid. They all have expertise and background in the areas that they're developing. We have a maps team that consists of 4 to 5 people. We have a game design team that consists of 2 people. We have a concept artist in-house. We have a freelance music writer, composer, who's doing all of the music, including the guitar riffs that you hate.
I love the guitar riffs. I just think they're out of place. I love the guitar riffs.
I think about the guitar riffs, I wanted to bring this up, but you never noticed. The premise is that the tutorial, the overworld, is a nice, relaxing, casual music. When you actually go downstairs into the combat, it's actually just a rock remix of the tutorial track that you have.
Oh, wow. I did not pick up on that.
Yep.
That is actually pretty cool, though.
A lot of the music and a lot of the tracks are very non-game music. Alexander Avax, who's our composer, comes from a more pop techno type background.
Yeah.
And Genfanad is his first game design is his first soundtrack that he's composing for a game. But I basically let him go crazy. When he joined the project, I wasn't even sure whether we were going to have music in the first place.
Yeah.
So I just let him write the tracks that he wanted to that would cover that. And I knew that I wanted to have a musical separation between normal gameplay, which is, or I guess relaxing overworld gameplay, towns and cities, and dungeons. So what we ended up going with is the basically the underground, the dungeon type content is all rock
I see.
metal based. The overworlds are more traditional video game like tracks, which are just like strong melody and different instruments. And cities are more upbeat, more happy tracks. And then he also made a bunch of like remixes of the different tracks that we're doing. Like we have a dwarfs theme, which I showed off earlier.
Oh yeah.
And then we have a dance remix of the dwarfs theme. I have no idea what we're going to be using the dance remix for, but we have it for whatever content we want to build.
Nice.
And then we also have an animator in-house now, and of course we have a community manager who tries to market the game and push it out to as many places as possible. The one thing that I would note to any game developers who are listening to this, whatever marketing resources you have, double them and then double them again, because whatever you are doing is not enough. Game design, marketing is probably half or more of any successful project. If you're not doing marketing, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, we should talk about Genfanad marketing and the Kickstarter. I think Genfanad's been doing a really good job at marketing. I mean, you definitely have... You were in a good situation from the start, right? Because RuneScape Classic fans, their game is gone. Their options are either private servers or this game, I guess. But I mean, yeah, what was your overall marketing strategy from the beginning? And I guess then... Yeah.
You definitely have significantly overstated the success of our marketing. So first off, in order to make a successful game these days, just retro RuneScape Classic fans who have been dying for a new alternative is not enough of a market to be successful in. It might be enough of a market to get some initial Kickstarter backers, but as we noted, that's not nearly enough to actually pay for the full development of a brand new game.
Right, yeah, the full team, exactly.
We've actually been basically just blundering along with our marketing since the beginning of the project. I started trying to do it myself, quickly learned that I cannot do it myself, and then had a lot of discussions and a lot of different ways of trying to push the game and trying to promote it to different people. I would not say that we're in a good place marketing wise. We've definitely had a few more opportunities and a few more ways of showing off our game in the recent past. We're in the Steam Next Fest showcase this week. We were in the OTK Games Expo last week. But as you can probably guess, we are not as well polished and not a good presenting game. People laugh at the trailers we produce. People are interested in the writing style, but our game is a recreation of a 20-year-old retro game. Art-wise, we know we're not going to appeal to very many people. We just need to find the people who are really into the type of content that we're creating.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't trying to say that you guys are this super massively financial successful project, but the fact that you guys have honed in on your audience successfully, I mean, that takes something. For sure. I mean, how did you reach RuneScape players? Like, did you reach out to content creators? Did you post on Reddit? Was it just like paid social media advertising? How did you get to where you are now, at least?
Basically everything that you've mentioned and more.
Yeah.
Marketing is very much a throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks type situation. The earliest burst of marketing was actually a YouTuber. I just reached out to a few YouTubers that made video content, and one of them was interested in taking a look, and I gave him a private demo of very old, very in development type stuff, and I got our Discord from 20 people to a few hundred people. And then since that, I had different ways of trying to promote it, both press releases, the various indie MMO articles on MMORPG.com and Massively OP started picking us up after we looked sort of interesting enough for them to cover. We did press releases, we did trailer dumps, we reached out to a bunch of people cold calling, we tried Facebook ads, we tried social media ads, we tried social media posts, and so on and so forth.
Gotcha.
So we don't have a cohesive marketing strategy. We have a bunch of stuff that we tried, some of which has been sort of successful.
Gotcha. Yeah, I remember that actually. You reminded me. That was right around when I first met you, when you that first like popular YouTube video, and you crossed the amount of Discord users that I have in my server like overnight or something. Maybe that's a little bit exaggerated.
Yeah, I think we only crossed your Discord server a couple weeks back.
I think you crossed me, and then I crossed you back, and I think you eclipsed me again. So you kind of double dipped on me now.
Realistically, we have a couple thousand people who we can reach. But if you look at like our Kickstarter that is going on now, we have less than 200 people who are willing to put money down. By itself, that would not make a successful game. So one of the things that we're still panicking and we're still thinking over right
Yeah.
now is how do we make it so that we increase the number of backers, even if we technically reached our money goal.
Yeah. Well, we should talk about that Kickstarter a bit. I mean, what went into the original strategy for the Kickstarter? I mean, you have a marketing person, so I don't know how large your role was even in that.
So the Kickstarter is basically a story of many, many failures. We had one marketing person who had to leave the team for personal reasons. We were working with a PR agency who ended up pulling out of the project before the Kickstarter began. And we have a new marketing person who's currently working and is overloaded with the amount of work that she has to do. But the original plan for the Kickstarter was I left my full-time job last summer to try to pursue Genfanad full-time. And the original plan was I'd leave my job in July and then I'd get a Kickstarter up and running by September. That very much did not work. We were planning a new campaign strategy, a new logo, a new trailer, a bunch of stuff that was supposed to happen significantly sooner than it actually ended up happening. So we basically lost a lot of time that we could have spent hyping up the Kickstarter even further. We have a lot of very passionate fans who are willing and ready for the game to go live to start playing, but trying to actually churn that into a successful player base that doesn't just flop like every other MMO that's released is still difficult, even with a marketing person, even with a marketing budget.
I probably should have given the piece of context that today is June 17th and the Kickstarter started the 1st of this month and ends at the end of the month. And you guys, your initial goal was 10K with no flexible funding, and you easily hit that goal on day one. And I think now you guys are up to about 17K or something.
That's about right. Basically, what we're doing is the goal of the Kickstarter has fundamentally the goal of the Kickstarter is marketing. We're trying to find enough of a player base that they can support the game going live and reaching the players who would be interested by the time we actually release later this year.
Yeah.
The 10,000 goal was set so that we could hit it day one and get the burst of publicity from being an actually fully funded Kickstarter. That did sort of work out. People did see that, yes, we funded. There's definitely 3 or 4 things that are working against us. First off, we're an indie studio making an MMO. Second, my fingers are getting cut off. Second, we are trying to make it so that it's subscription based with a free tier. So the free to play audience is very, very picky. And of course, the free to play audience is not going to be backing us on Kickstarter because they're free to play.
Yeah.
Third, we do want to market it to kids. There's a lot of adults who are very into nostalgic MMOs, but one of the realities about adults is people don't have a lot of free time. People who played MMOs 20 years ago are not going to play it to the same extent that they did back then. So we absolutely need to find an audience that is brand new, that are willing to play these types of games.
Yeah.
And fourth, we set a very low goal for marketing, but a lot of people think, hey, you can't make an MMO for $10,000. And the answer is, well, duh. Yes, that's why we've put in multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars of our own money into making the game.
Right. Yeah. It's I think it's a smart move to even though you've largely funded the game yourself, it's like, why not do a Kickstarter? Why would any game not do a Kickstarter? Why not make that last marketing push and a little bit extra money push? Why would it not be worth your time? Unless I guess you just don't have the marketing budget, or you're just so pressed for time you need to be doing other things.
It's a large distraction. Kickstarter is a lot of work in order to get it up and running. And crowdfunding has been getting a lot of a bad rep recently.
Yeah.
Even before Kickstarter, the company itself has started fiddling with NFTs, which is a god-awful decision. Even before that, many games launch on Kickstarter, and there have been many high-profile Kickstarter projects that have been scams. Even Titan Reach, just recently, the developer of Titan Reach ended up taking all of the money and running away and buying a Tesla or something like that.
Oof.
In fact, of MMOs on Kickstarter, I think more of them have been scams than have not been scams. And Kickstarter, of course, is a risky platform. You fund and you get no guarantees about what you're making or about what you're funding and about what may or may not work for it. But even so, people are hesitant to fund things that from people are hesitant to fund things from unproven producers, basically. And we are absolutely an unproven studio. This is our first game. A lot of our team are new to the industry, and that's one of the things that is difficult.
Yeah, that's a fair concern, right? You might if you go out there, you're unknown, and you put out a project claiming to make an MMO with $10,000, which, by the way, you didn't claim. You were very clear in your Kickstarter description what the goals of the Kickstarter were, and it was not entirely funding a game with $10,000. So every time I see someone comment that on like a news article, I'm like, oh, this is dumbass. They didn't even read the Kickstarter. But anyway, you do risk bad PR, I guess, if you go out and do crowdfunding for something that people don't believe you for, I guess.
I will absolutely say that regardless of what outcome, we've reached the Kickstarter goal. We are going to launch Genfanad this year. Players will be able to go in and play the game. And one of the things that we did to try to get ahead of all of the bad situations that I just mentioned is we have a fully playable game that people can jump in and play immediately. As you demonstrated yesterday in your own playtest, the core game loop is there. The core mechanics are there. It is fun to jump in the game and click some logs and click some rocks. Will everyone like it? No. In fact, but even if you think about it, will everyone like RuneScape? Hell no. It's one of the most banned MMOs in the market today. Most people make fun of it.
Yeah, RuneScape is already super niche just due to the fact that you have to fucking click to walk around, like, or just the UI. It's just a.
But the other way of thinking about it is World of Warcraft had 1 million players, or World of Warcraft Classic recently released and hit 1 million players. RuneScape itself still gets 30 to 50,000 people concurrently to this day. Old school RuneScape launched with 1 million accounts or something like that. In order for us to be successful, all we need is just 1 in 100 people who currently play RuneScape to try us out and be interested. And if you think about it this way, 1 in 100, that definitely seems a lot more doable than whatever people are thinking.
Yeah. There was one more sort of game design question I had prepared for you that I was really interested about, and that is regarding the economy aspect of Genfanad. And RuneScape has a very weird economy in a lot of ways, and some people like a lot of things about it.
Broken.
Broken economy in a lot of ways. There's some things that people really like about it and feel like it makes the economy very core to the game's identity, but then there's also a lot of things that people think are shit. There's also a lot of disagreement in between RuneScape players about how the economy should function. How should the economy be in Genfanad, in your opinion?
So I'm not gonna. First off, what I'm saying is my opinions on RuneScape and not RuneScape. They are not. I'm not an economist. Interestingly enough, Valve actually hired an economist for one of their projects, and they became the finance minister of Greece after they left Valve or something like that. What? If you've never heard the story before, I suggest you Google it. It's a very fascinating and horrifying story about some of Valve's internal corporate culture. But I'll leave that for that.
Right.
In terms of actual economy, first off, anyone who thinks about game design aspects, just playing games is not sufficient to actually understand and to be qualified to talk about things. There's one of the one of the pitfalls that a lot of new developers and a lot of people who are starting out and learning something fall into is the fact that knowing a little makes you feel more confident to speak about things than knowing a lot does. Someone
Mhm.
who is deep and understands a certain philosophy will always speak out and be more uncertain about what they're speaking of. Uh, so the loudest voices tend to dominate a conversation. So if you just search around for forums and for Reddit threads that talk about RuneScape's economy is broken, here's how to fix it, most of the time you're basically seeing amateurs talk to amateurs who have no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
I am an amateur. I do not have an economics background. I am speaking from a perspective of uh, I've watched enough game design analysis and I've looked at enough games that I have some understanding
Mhm.
of what's going on. But fundamentally, we also have two game designers on staff who do have that background, who have taken and taught college courses on game design, who can take my guidance and turn it into an actual implementation. So most of my thoughts are high level thoughts on what I want the game to be.
Yeah.
What I'm going to be describing is not going to be necessarily the way that it becomes reality. In
Right.
fact,
Right. Right.
some of the things that I'm going to be saying are just uh, are just ideas.
Well, right. You're the boss man. You just say what you want, and they just go magically make it happen. It's fine.
Exactly. But the important thing is I say what I want. I don't say how to do it.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
They figure out how to do it, and that's the part that makes it successful. In terms of economy, from a high level, uh, game economies work by roughly balancing the sources of currency and the sinks for the currency. So if you have a lot of things that are generating gold that players are doing, but you don't have a lot of ways to spend it to remove gold from the game, overall, that's inflationary. It means the value of gold will go down and players will hoard lots of gold. If you have few ways of making gold and a lot of things that players want to spend the gold on, overall, the value of gold will go up. That's deflationary, and players will have little of it. In fact, both of those are not value judgments. Uh, an inflationary economy is not necessarily bad, and a deflationary economy is not necessarily bad. What is bad is players not being able to do what they want.
Yeah.
So, in a deflationary economy, having too many items that cost a lot of gold, but players not being able to reach that gold is a problem. In an inflationary economy, having players create the gold but not have anything to spend it on is a problem because they just they don't get to do anything cool. And the second point to consider is a player trading with another player. For example, a player selling a sword for 10,000 gold is not a gold sink because the gold remains in the game. It
Right.
remains to be spent and it exists still. Uh, one of the fundamentals of RuneScape that still exists to this day is the spells high level alchemy and low level
Yeah.
alchemy. That is an absurd gold source
Mhm.
because any item in RuneScape can be turned into gold coins very, very easily, which means a lot of gold is coming into the system.
Yep.
And the RuneScape developers are aware of that. They've tried many times to create sinks in the RuneScape economy that drain gold out of the system, but they have not been very successful. Both in It's not that they haven't been successful in designing them; it's that the player base of RuneScape has very commonly rejected those types of gold sinks.
Mhm.
For example, the earliest gold sink they created, I might be getting some of these updates in the wrong order, but one of the earliest gold sinks they created was the Barrows equipment that
Oh,
was
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
Gradable Armor
Yeah.
that was the next tier that you have to pump gold in to repair. Uh, Players hated that because before that update, every single armor never degraded. And they're like, why would I have to pay an upkeep cost when all of my other stuff just works normally? The next thing they tried was the construction skill. The construction skill literally drained gold because you had to buy every single thing in that skill with gold.
Mm-hmm.
That mostly worked, but it was basically a one-off. Once a player bought a thing for their house, they never had to pay for it again.
Yep.
So it drained a certain amount of gold from the economy, but then it was not a continuous gold sink. One of the more successful sinks that they did was the summoning skill, where in order to do something for the summoning, they had to buy spirit shards from a shop, and then those shards would get consumed. But by the time the summoning skills came out, players already had billions of gold, and party hats cost hundreds of millions of gold to purchase. So by that point, it was kind of already too late.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of Genfanad's economy, some of the things that we're considering are, first off, rare mythical one-off items are really cool. The concept of party hats being these legendary things that only like the players rarely see and almost never get the chance to collect. That type of mythology is really powerful for a game.
It's just exciting. It triggers something in your brain.
Yeah, it's really nice. Secondly, the concept of hoarding for those items is not so exciting. If we release an event where we drop a bunch of Santa hats on the ground, we want players having fun with those Santa hats and playing around with them and trading them to their friends. We don't want them just running around picking up as many as possible and throwing them in their bank. That's just not fun.
Yeah. And that's how I used to be as well. I remember like reading old blog posts, like when they first dropped the things like party hats or like Santa hats and stuff. People didn't treat them the way that they're treated in modern RuneScape. People did just share them with their friends and casually.
Yep, and that's the reason why they became rare, is because no one hoarded. In terms of actual economy, we think that the high level alchemy spell was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, trying to introduce that much gold into the economy is a problem. One of the things we're playing around with is making a single gold piece significantly more valuable than it was in RuneScape.
Yeah.
If you play the current alpha, we may have gone a bit too far in the other direction, where we actually don't have enough gold sources in the game. But those are things that Corey and Joshua and the rest of the team are playing around with and trying to establish a good baseline so that when we release the game, the economy starts out in a slightly healthier state. Players are still expected to collect hundreds and thousands of gold to get the most expensive items. And of course, we have the concept of recipes and things like that so that we do that. And one of the other things that we're addressing is actually RuneScape had an item source problem. In order to progress from smithing, RuneScape players would have to create thousands of the same best item in the game.
Mm-hmm.
We actually twisted the mechanics slightly, and because we're a new game where players are a bit more understanding of more difficult mechanics, and what we've introduced the concept of item qualities, where getting a high quality bronze giant sword is actually an achievement. Even if you're level 15 smithing or forging, which is the level that you need to craft that sword, first off, you have to unlock a recipe before you're even able to start trying to make those. Secondly, it's a multi-step process. So you have to turn the ore into bars, the bars into a pommel and into a sheet, and the sheet into a blade, and the blade into a sharpened. There's basically multiple intermediate steps that you have to transform all of the items into. And every single step in that process basically has a 1 in 10 chance at most of creating a high quality version.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So even though any single step in the process feels achievable, so a player can actually do the thing 10 times and get the high quality result that they want, the entire process transformatively basically multiplies all of those probabilities. So in order to produce an actual bronze giant sword, they might have to make like 10,000 or 100,000 individual items before they can actually craft that final thing. Yeah. So it makes having that high quality item by itself a significant achievement.
Yeah.
and players have been enjoying that. They've definitely been having some grumbling of, hey, I'm losing too many resources, losing too many materials, and we may need to tweak the specific numbers a lot before we get the final version that we care about. But someone did craft a full high quality set of armor, and they were very, very proud of that fact, and
Yeah.
everyone was like, wow, this is an absurd achievement. And in the meantime, all of the resources that they made while training that skill didn't end up affecting the economy too much.
Wow, that is very cool. Yeah, that's actually one of the most unique, interesting mechanics I've heard about from Genfanad so far. That's cool, and it's exactly like that sort of optimization. It's the type of thing that gives me faith in Genfanad, you know, having some advantages over like RuneScape Classic.
You've asked about some things that we're changing about RuneScape. It's very difficult to actually look at a screenshot of Genfanad and look at a screenshot of RuneScape Classic and see many differences. But if you those types of mechanical things, we basically have the equivalent of RuneScape Classic running now and working completely fine.
Yeah.
All of the mechanics are there. There's combat, there's trading, there's shops, there's gold, there's banks, there's resources, there's skills, there's processing, there's gathering, there's and so on. And now we're actually playing the game design game of what is fun, what is interesting, how do we use these building blocks that we built to make a compelling game.
Yeah.
Item qualities. The new forging system is basically an example of the game design thought that we're putting into that we are going to be putting into all of the skills in the game. So you may have seen that the old system was basically take a bar, click a processing location, and see a list of recipes.
Mm-hmm.
We've inverted that, and we've actually gone with a more Minecraft style where you go to a anvil and it pops up an interface and it asks, which items do you want to combine?
Oh, yeah.
And that interface allows you to start doing discovery. So you don't know how to make the item that you want to make yet, but you know that if you put two bars together, you can make this thing. And then if you put the bar back into the anvil, you get a hint of, okay, so you can try to create these things. And if you do create them, you can get this thing. So players actually have a wide skill tree that they have to learn, that they have to understand, that they have to balance, that we have to balance. And that discovery lets us add and switch things around on players as the game goes along. We don't expect there to be a single completed skill in the game. We expect to do something similar to what League of Legends and Dota ended up doing, where every single time they patch the game, they basically rebalance a bunch of things. If we discover that every player is struggling creating iron rivets, for example, we can increase the rate on those. We can reduce the failure rate. We can balance the XP rates. We can change the materials that feed into it, and so on. RuneScape never did that mostly because of their player base. They had momentum is a very difficult thing to overcome. If you are not changing, if you're not buffing a sword or nerfing a sword on a regular basis, players will start to come to expect, okay, so I have this sword, it will never become stronger or weaker. So if you ever need to buff or nerf something, the player base will have a strong negative reaction to you doing so.
Right.
However, if you are coming from a perspective where, oh, this sword was 7 power last week and now it's 6 power, and next week it's going to be 8 power, players are going to be a lot more receptive to that type of feedback. So that's one of the things that we want to always have patch notes going and tweaking and twisting different things so that players never become too attached to specific numbers, to specific designs, to specific areas.
Yeah, man. I wonder if you'll ever find yourself with the same problem as RuneScape. Like, I wonder, like, 5 years down the line, you have a much larger player base. I wonder if there will be some things that you look back on and you're like, damn, I wish we didn't get locked into this.
I've actually been rediscovering, as I built Genfanad, I've definitely been rediscovering and finding, in my mind, there have definitely been situations where, like, oh, that's why RuneScape did it this way,
Mm,
or oh, that explains this bug. That's why it got triggered. So
yeah.
things like the follow mechanics doing the auto dancing thing, I had that working in an older build, and I realized, oh, the reason they added the follow skill is because, or the reason they added the follow option was because they already had that for NPC attacking, and adding the option means that you can add this player-facing feature for free.
Yeah.
And those
Oh,
types
that's really
of
cool.
game design anecdotes and those types of systems are really cool. I would encourage every game developer to try to implement something that they think they have, that they think they understand. It will definitely give them a bit more understanding than they expect.
Yeah, man, just trying to implement something that already exists is a really good learning exercise, for sure. Well, that's all I have prepared to ask you about Genfanad. But if there's anything really burning, anything that you'd really like to share that stands out to you before we wrap up, feel free to.
Uh, if you're interested in retro games, definitely look through and see what other people are doing. One of the things that was very interesting is like you would think that game developers are very competitive and they fight a lot and they're like trying to they're all trying to compete for the same audience. But realistically, people tend to collaborate. Like there's a Discord that has like 30 different indie MMO developers all talking to each other and all sharing ideas and all uh, spreading the word and answering each other's questions and talking about marketing and things like that. Uh, I don't know where I was going with that. I'm just saying people generally like to collaborate. If you're a game developer, reach out to other game developers. If you're a game player, reach out to other game players.
Yeah,
Collaborate.
well, I appreciate you coming here and giving us pretty much exactly what you just described. So much insight over the last hour. Jeez, man. Well, I will again encourage people to check out Genfanad at genfanad.com. There is a Kickstarter going on as well as of the time of recording this. Of course, that'll be over soon. But yeah, again, thank you everybody. Thank you so much, Heleor, for joining us. Thank you everybody who watched live or otherwise. Thank you, Covalence, the sponsor of this podcast and pretty much everything that I do, which is the web development school that I went to a few years ago before I became a game developer. And there you go, Genfanad. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good one.